fitting in is not belonging. Fitting in is I have to be someone else in order to fit, right? Belonging is I am who I am and you accept me as I am, and that's how we connect.
Like if you allow yourself to actually think about what your feelings are, think about and experience your experiences, it gives you more data so you can make better decisions.
Maybe we're assuming something that actually isn't true because we're all examples where certain nuggets of information we were very open to at a young age.
We've been living off the rail for such a long time that it's difficult for us to think that there's a better way forward for us. It's too late. It's not.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Living Richly podcast. We're so glad that you're tuning in once again. We're so grateful for your ongoing support of the show. And today we are really excited to welcome back two former guests, Matthew Rippeyoung. You were with us on episode 78, number 78 for anybody who wants to go back and listen. And we had such a great conversation with you then. You're a psychologist. You have your own practice, right? And been helping people for a very long time. And we're glad to welcome back Don Lachance, old friend of ours. And by old, I mean old friend. Old. He's also old.
It fits both categories.
Older. He fits both categories. But you were with us. You're a grief specialist. One of the many things that you do, among that is grief specialist. And you spoke to us about that in episodes 65 and 66. So for anyone, again, who wants to go find that. But gentlemen, great to have you here.
And we should probably announce now the pool that we have around how long it's going to take for this episode to go completely off the rails. I think
11.6 seconds.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why I was trying to extend out the introduction.
You had 24 seconds, so you're trying to just
I just try to keep it on the rails at least during the intro.
It's over.
And it's over already. Okay. But no, I'm excited about this conversation because we reached out to the two of you not long ago. You know that we've been having these conversations around mindful masculinity. And it's been interesting to watch the reaction to those conversations, both positively, and we've gotten some negative blowback as well. But we thought we'd come together and have a conversation around advice to our younger selves. If we could go back in time knowing what we know now, let's face it, men today are in a bit of a quandary when it comes to what does it mean to be male now in today's society. And I think that's a good quandary. It's making us rethink all kinds of things. But for young men today, it can be very, very confusing. And so kind of in that context, what advice we would have.
And we talked about, we were joking right before we began to record about how young, because, at what age were we ready? And I'm curious, I'm going to ask you guys this. Yep. At what stage in your life were you ready to start to receive and to learn? And when did you become open to the realization that, I can learn, I can get advice from other people? Do you remember when that kind of moment happened, or at the stage of life you were in when you started to receive that?
Yesterday.
No, I'm still not sure I am.
Yeah. Do I get to pick and choose what I believe in and how I feel about things? Yeah. It started early on for me because just such a decrepit existence prior to that, wanting to learn, wanting to know more.
Was it when you started into recovery? Would it be in that kind of age bracket, or was it before that you were already ready to receive from others?
I think I've always been ready to receive. I do. And I think it just really kind of speaks to the deep empath traits in me.
Right.
And wanting to be able to provide and help and elements like that. So, I've always been willing to take information in.
Well, that's up for me because I honestly, when I was asking the question, then preparing for the show, I'm like, okay, if I was to go back and speak to my younger self, I'm like, at what age would I have to go back in time to where I'd be willing to listen? Because I think of how long I like you, I think was open, but not on certain fronts, right? But what about for you?
I don't think I've ever been cursed with the affliction of I need to know everything or I need to be the authority on everything. So I'd go back to teenage years that it was I don't have to do all the things. There are other people. Yeah. And so it's been very helpful.
Yeah.
And same, I would certainly go back and say, certainly 12, 13, 14 is really when I started to recognize that and begin to be open to, again, not in every area, but in many areas, ready to receive that. And it's interesting because we have the notion, oh, young people, they think they know it all. They're not willing to listen. And actually, we're going to kind of maybe debunk that a bit and say, we do have the opportunity to go back to the younger people that might be listening, or those that are listening that have younger people, and they go, I'm never going to share an episode with my kids because they wouldn't even be open to it. Well, maybe they would.
Yeah, maybe they would.
Maybe we're assuming something that actually isn't true, because we're all examples where certain nuggets of information we were very open to at a young age.
Yeah, I think for me, what cracked me open even more and made me more desperate and open to receiving input was pain, right? When I started to realize that much of what I'd grown up with in terms of constructs, beliefs, everything else, when that wasn't working, the less that worked, the more open I became to seek out new answers and better ways of doing things. I'm curious, gentlemen, like from your perspective, what do you think are some of the most difficult challenges that young men face today when it comes to the understanding of what it means to be male in today's society?
One thing that really leaps out for me is, like, when you talk about how far back do you need to go, if we're talking to young men, it's already too late. Like, we need to be talking to boys.
Right. Good point.
Well, no, this is the thing, though, is like, because at 12, 13, 14, there's this whole mess of boys that are being told, like, you have too much, you take up too much space, like with all the ways in which we need to make space for everybody. Little boys getting told that they're really privileged. Like at 13, when you're a zitty and you don't want to get called to the board because you've got a boner in your gym pants, like you do not feel privileged.
Right.
And so it doesn't relate. And so then all these boys are like rife. They're ready to be plucked by the Jordan Petersons, by the Andrew Tates, who are like, no, being a man is great and here's how to do it. And they get all these shitty messages.
Right.
And so that then by the time that they're men, they're fucking up their relationships, and there's a ton of people that pay the price for that stuff. So
and
I think
they go through the pain that you're talking about because they didn't learn and be open at that early age.
Well, and they weren't hearing more nuanced messages,
right?
And so we really need to be talking to boys and helping boys take up the right amount of space, take up their space, not more, not less.
Right. Oh, I love that.
I think that's such a powerful distinction to make. When you think about that, when I look at my history and I wanted to live as a man at the age of 7.
Yeah.
Right.
When you think about that, really, and, the distinction there, like talking to boys, I don't know of a boy who would want to be treated like a boy.
Yeah.
Like that's the big struggle for so many because of that conditioning. Like I look at my situation with my dad, who was a phys ed instructor in the Army. I was being brought up by my grandfather, who was a World War II vet, an Ottawa Rough Rider. Well, they were called the Big Four back then, but, a famous lacrosse player.
You are old.
Yeah, I know. And I'm feeling just now that I can be a boy.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
What a statement.
Well, because of just the willingness to get out there. And it's just such a better equipping for us, because boys, who are they comparing themselves to? And in this day and age with technology the way it is, if we don't think that the boys are looking for identity, and it's just facilitated by the loud voices like the Petersons, like the Andrew Tates.
And in our day, where a lot of that, because the social media wasn't around, like I can remember at 10 years old, when I was 10 when Star Wars came out. And
you're old too.
Yeah. All of a sudden it was Han Solo. Han Solo was.
That's right. You said that.
And I remember I would walk around with that bravado of, well, what would Han Solo do? And that's how I would act, right? And who
didn't want Chewbacca as a best friend? Like, let's
that was great. Yeah.
That was the one. Like, have you ever seen? There was a commercial about Chewbacca in a studio. Total aside, and the producer keeps saying, "Okay, now give me sad," and he makes the same sound. Now give me angry, same sound. Now give me happy, same sound and expression. And the producer keeps saying, "You nailed it! You nailed it!" It's hilarious. I have to try to find that video. Sorry, total aside. Off the rails. You were saying something very, very.
No, important. I was done. You had jumped in and agree. You were jumping in and agreeing with me.
I was.
And then he made the sound. Go ahead. That's going to be a clip.
That's going to be.
Oh, look, we've got willing participants.
All right, but let's talk about. So let's talk about programming. I loved how you brought it to. We need to start sooner, right? We need to start when they're young, because that conditioning is a thing. That programming, I think you call it faulty programming, right? Like it's we've been wired and conditioned to show up a certain way, and what we realize is that was an incomplete picture. Sometimes completely incorrect. Other times just incomplete. We didn't have the whole. What are some of the what do you feel are some of the more damaging messages that are messing with men in general, but specifically with young men who are just trying to discover who they are at that stage of life?
I really think it goes back to like a lack of diversity. There's one way to be a man,
right?
And here's the box, and here's where you fit, and this is what you're supposed to do. And if you step outside the box, you're going to get a black eye,
right?
And so it's very circumscribed around, what you can and can't do. And, boys, not only do they not get like rewarded for emotional expression, but they often get punished.
Right.
So it's not that women are just naturally better at it.
Right.
It's that they get a ton more practice.
Right.
And so I think that,
oh, that's really good. Yeah.
Like, if we let boys practice more, they then get to have more. They get to explore more parts of themselves and recognize that we're not all the same. It isn't a cookie cutter. There isn't one image we all should be trying to get towards.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. What do you think, Don?
Well, it's for me, it's kind of, we already start pushing them into gender specific activities. And if I was to go back and talk to my younger self, I'd be going back quite a distance, but I'd be saying, just be a good person.
Right.
Like, never mind the role that like you think you have to take on, or one that I believe you should be fitting into this mold, and these are the things you should be experiencing. Just learn how to be a caring, giving, kind, accepting person.
Yeah.
And drop. I think we're experiencing a lot of that now with a lot of the gender struggles and the wars that are taking place on that front. Like, it's creating a lot more division than it is anything else from an accepting perspective.
Right.
You know? So for me, it's all about I often talk about living on the edge of the division coin that the world is experiencing right now. And it's a lonely existence. And I live by a simple motto. They will know us by our love for one another. And it's insignificant, or I don't care about what people's choices are. I want a safe place for everybody. Regardless of what path you want to walk down or where you feel you're being pushed. And there's just so much noise out there, and people wanting to form and have people fit in.
Yeah, you're so right. When we began this series around masculinity, we talk about this certainly when we first introduced it, and we probably mention it again in every one of the episodes, is we're very deliberate with calling it mindful masculinity.
Yeah.
We were not, because I think the toxic masculinity thing is, that, again, that's all that causes is people to get their backs up and defensive, and it closes off conversation. The pendulum does swing sometimes far to the other side when we start having these, it's this or that, and we see that, right? And but
even how, if I can jump in, even how we define toxic masculinity, though, it has been an interesting thing that we've explored, to say we often lump into toxic masculinity the extreme versions of it, violence, aggression, right, misogyny, all of it. We put it all in that, lump that into toxic masculinity. But equally toxic is the inability to feel, being emotionally shut down, right, living in this trap of your own mind, and again feeling like you have to fit into this cookie cutter image of what it means to be a man, and if you don't, then somehow you're deficient, right? Like, that is equally toxic. It doesn't have the same repercussions as some of the more extreme versions, but it's still toxic in terms of it's not healthy. It's really not healthy.
And again, going back to mindful, what does it mean to truly be, to choose and to learn and to embrace that? And that's what I love about the fact that we've got a psychologist and a grief specialist here today, because these are the areas where so much of what it is to be a man gets experienced. Like, so talk a little bit about grief and childhood. I'm sure most of your work is, well, I'm going to make an assumption here and you can correct my assumption. My assumption is most of your work with grief is with adults who are trying to understand and process grief. But what's it like for kids, and what would be the message, even for the parents listening? What can we teach our children, our young boys, about how to experience grief and how to express that?
It's interesting because you keep using the word grief.
Yeah.
And really it's layers deeper than that. It's loss. Mm. And what we experience on that
Can you give your definition of grief again? Just, I know you did in one of your
episodes. Well, grief really is, we want to attribute what we experience in regards to grief to the death of a loved one or the end of a cherished relationship. Whereas the same emotional turmoil surfaces in us that's normal and natural when we experience any loss. And and the examples I gave, I believe, were like loss of innocence, loss of value, loss of worth,
loss of a job,
loss of a job, the end of a relationship. Yeah. Like there's loss surrounding all of that. One of the first examples I use with people, like in initial conversations, is asking them if they've ever moved. And wow, you go to your parents when they tell you you're moving. And like, I know the experience from watching your episode, like what was unfolding on that front, Matthew. And we go to them with this angst and, here are the explanations we get. Well, your dad or your mom's got a better job. You'll be okay. You'll make new friends. They don't acknowledge, they don't validate any of the pain that we bring to them in regards to that. And our worlds are falling apart.
Yeah.
We're all we're thinking about is like my friends, like, how I love that park. Like that was my favorite tree to climb and swing in. Right. Like all those small things that are really the big things. And the older I get, the more I realize that the small things are really the big things.
Oh, isn't it interesting? Because I've got my kids are all adults now. My youngest is almost 19, started his second year in university.
It's almost time for you to be in.
It's almost be what?
Never mind.
I missed that completely. I don't even know what you said.
Watch the episode.
Watch the episode. I'll watch it back. My second daughter just got married this summer, right? So I've got adult children now. But I remember like when they're a bit younger and they're giving you grief over stuff and they're telling you how stressed they are and in the back of your mind as an adult, you go, you have no idea, right? Because we're thinking, we've got to go to work. We got to put a roof over your head, make sure you're taking care of all this other stuff, and you're stressed out because you got homework and volleyball practice, right? But we forget that for them at that age, those things that may appear small to us are actually quite large. And I don't think we do a good job. I don't think I did a good job of raising my kids to know how to process grief or process loss in any kind of way.
Well, right? when you think about it, really,
I wasn't equipped. I didn't even.
Well, no, but like it's funny you use that term, like we forgot. And forget the forgetting, like we just didn't have it. Yeah. We didn't know. We take in like all our really deep-rooted beliefs from the people we loved and trusted the most, our parents. Look at BB here. What kind of truth did I get from a parent? So, holy smokes, you move through a life with that. We do more deconstructing than we do constructing on most fronts.
Matthew, I'm curious. You're a psychologist. You help people for a living. You've been doing this a very, very long time. Again, your story is still your episode. Both of you guys is some of my favorite episodes, best guests we've had on, just because of the conversation was so rich. From your perspective, as you work with people and in your own journey, what misconceptions about masculinity specifically have been beyond when you talk about that box that they have to live in? What are the labels that go into that box that are really holding people back and causing unnecessary pain and turmoil?
I think one of the big messages is that, boys and men have to figure it out on their own, that we're not supposed to figure it out in relationships.
Right.
And Yes, it's good to be introspective, but really in a vacuum, you don't get to know things. And it really is how we bump up against each other that we can start to figure out, what some of the feelings are, some of the thoughts. And, I remember in university, I studied a lot actually about gender in university, which was handy. And, I had this socialization class, and it was this real eye opener that everything is made up. Like everything is fucking made up. And so if it's all made up, we can remake it. You can make it the way that you want to.
Love that. And
so as a young man, it was a very freeing set of messages to be getting on the regular.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that men are supposed to be solid. We're supposed to, know the things like the 7-year-old who wants to be an adult.
Right.
I hear 13 and 14-year-olds in my office, talk about they expect to be self-sufficient somehow at 18. I'm like, have you seen the economy? It wasn't true when I was 18. What? What? But they're like, well, no, I can't. And they have wealthy parents and I can't take money from my parents. I'm like, why wouldn't you? How are you going to get started if you don't have help?
Right.
And it's this idea that we're not supposed to ask for help.
Yeah.
If it comes, that's maybe we accept it, but actually, I don't want to look like I need it.
Right.
And we're needy.
Right.
Just as kids, we're needy. As men, we're needy. Needy is not a problem.
Yeah.
The problem is denying it.
Right. I love that. We end up, I think I was in a conversation recently and I said, it was actually on another podcast where I was being interviewed. And I said, I think we spend most of our 20s, 30s, late 30s, early 40s building this construct, right? This false self that we think the world expects of us. And context of this show, this would be young men feeling I need to show up a certain way that's socially acceptable. And, 70% of the population, according to recent studies, their sole purpose for existence is fitting in. That's all they're really, right? So that pressure we talk about peer pressure in high school, fuck high school. It continues on far beyond high school. It's very significant in high school, but it never really ends unless you break the cycle. But I said, I think we spend most of those formative years, 20s, 30s, 40s, building this construct only to at some point start taking it apart. And then who am I really? Right. And I think the message I would love to go back to my younger self and share that message. We were talking about, the context that I grew up in. You were part of that. You saw me grow up in that very rigid religious environment and feel that the only thing that I could do was do what I ended up doing for 15 years, only to know, wake up one day and go, this isn't me. This isn't it. This isn't me. But again, the conditioning, the programming we receive from others is so significant, right?
Let's really spend some time in this advice to our younger selves. And maybe what would be helpful is you and I can let's come up with some topics, some areas. So I'm going to start. I got one right off the top of okay. So when it comes to love and relationship, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I mean, really, for me, probably all my answers are going to go back to the same thing, but have the friggin' feels. Right. It's okay to feel things. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you being vulnerable your neck isn't on a cutting board.
Right.
If you allow yourself to actually think about what your feelings are, think about and experience your experiences, it gives you more data so you can make better decisions. This idea that, we're supposed to be a certain way or there are rules. Do you remember, what was it? Was it Swingers? Did anybody see the movie Swingers in the 90s?
I know it, but
it sounds familiar.
I lived it.
But
folks, that's for another episode.
But I think Jon Favreau did it, but it was about dating in the 90s. And, there's the rule that okay, so you have a first date. So you have to wait 2 days before you can call. And this was, before cell phones and texting and whatever. Yeah. But there are these rules. Or in the 90s too, there was I think the book was called The Rules about, how women could get men to propose marriage to them. And there's it's garbage. I love trash TV, but all this garbage that there are these ways, it takes out the idea that what are my personal experiences? How do I feel about this? Yeah. As opposed to I think people should, kind of figure out who you are first. not what am I supposed to be? What's the goal here? Because that gets you away from yourself. And so if you figure out, okay, well, who and how am I? Then you can figure out, where do I fit?
Right.
What really works for me, and spend more time there as opposed to jamming your feet into like a size 3 shoe.
Right.
Like,
oh, I love that analogy.
I know for me, to answer the question, is I think if I was to go back to my younger self, relationships aren't about you just giving. And, so basically surrendering your own wants and needs for the sake of someone else. A relationship isn't about you disappearing into somebody else. Would probably be something I would say to my younger self.
That's part. It's part of the conditioning, right?
Yeah,
like that men aren't supposed to be needy, that men are not supposed to, that we're supposed to figure it all out, right?
Yeah.
Well, we provide.
Right, exactly. We're supposed to be the helper and hold everything together. And when things get tough, just rub some dirt on it, right? Like just out hustle it, out muscle it. And I think, again, in our earlier years when we're younger, we don't even know what we're dealing with yet. So we don't know how to. So we just up the effort, right? We do out hustle and out muscle it to a degree, but we're not dealing. Where all we're doing is I'm good. Yeah. I'm good, right?
Steve's gonna love that on the audio later.
It's gonna be a clip.
Steve!
We're gonna hey.
Don, what would you tell your younger self when it comes to relationships?
I agree with Matthew in regards to experiencing the feels. Take that trip from your head to your heart, 13 inches in the average human body.
Longest journey ever.
Yeah, the longest journey ever. And getting people to at least acknowledge what they are feeling. Not try and master it, but to simply acknowledge, because from acknowledgement, the pathway then leads to acceptance. And that's where responsibility kind of comes into the fold, and we get to make better decisions. We get to open up a little more. It's interesting. I almost wore a tap out hoodie here.
Yeah.
Like I'm a big UFC fan, right? And I was thinking about that. What does tapping out mean? And I think a lot of people will look at it as
that's most men's emotional strategy.
Right.
Well,
I'm out.
No, I think it isn't. They fight that. Some of them go out.
Right.
Like they fight that. They won't tap out. And I think a better strategy and a better application of the tap out is to do that, because that provides you with the pathway to fight again. That provides you with a pathway to move forward and
They'll
accept.
pass out before they tap out.
Yeah. And what's that drive from? I've got to be the toughest. Like, I grew up in a tavern. Like that's my education was in a tavern. And like, that's a whole other organism, right? Like that's a whole other world. And you watch what unfolds within those four walls, and you can't show weakness. Like you can't show any of that. No emotion. You're called to do things that like go against every bit of you. And so you can imagine the struggle. BB here, the deepest empath I know. And like, I experienced it once more in a young brother-in-law who would get into fights, and he'd bring the kids home that he beat up, wash them up, give them an apple, and send them home.
But
think about
fucked
that.
Up. Like,
it is.
But I just don't beat him up.
It is.
Here's the apple.
But we're not there, right? Because we're trying to be.
They haven't earned the apple.
They haven't earned the apple.
We're trying to be that. But you see here, even attaching the word, they haven't earned it.
Yeah.
Like we feel we've always got to earn something, that it's not ours, that it's not there for the taking. And the more we feel, the broader the scope is of options we get.
Yeah.
So
what about you?
I wish I would have heard the message about loving myself a lot sooner, because it would take me a long time. I lived with and I've talked about it openly on the show, and when I tell people deep self-loathing, like I use those words very, very deliberately. This wasn't just I don't feel good about myself. Like I honestly believed that I was different. Here I was pushed to the front of the room from a young age to lead. Part of it because of my energy, and I was always an energetic kid that wanted to help people, so I get pushed to the front of the room. And Then before I know it, I'm 23 years old. I'm running a church planning a brand new church, and I'm the leader. I don't even know who I am yet. I don't even have a fully formed brain. And here I am at the front of the room, expected to do all of this.
Counseling parents.
People are coming to me for counseling. And I'm like, what the fuck? I didn't go to school for it, right? I went to Bible college. So, people come to me for help, and yet you felt this need, right? And so I always felt like I was flawed, like that I was an imposter. I didn't belong there. And then if anybody found out, what the hell's he doing at the front of the room kind of thing, right?
Is it all that sin stuff? Like that? Because often, like, I have other friends who had very active religious life as young people. And like one in particular, like she is the sweetest, kindest person. And she's like, I'm the worst.
100%. Like the fear, guilt, and shame piece that comes from religious context is, I was on another show just last week, and the lady asked me, what drove you to do what you do today? So I said, well, so part of my background, and people are always like a little shocked that you were a what? I mean, you know what that's like, right? Like, you were a what?
Well, I watched him experience. Talk about it openly.
He talked about it on the show. He's like, when I found out these guys were 2 ex-pastors, I don't know if I won't even get near them, right? But I came to this, I was telling her the story about, like, it was such a struggle for me. And then she starts talking about how she's from a Methodist background and not churchgoer, but grew up Methodist. Her husband grew up Catholic. And they have these conversations as a couple, and she'll say, oh, that's my Methodist guilt showing up, or this is my Catholic guilt showing up. But fear, guilt, and shame, you talk about the sin thing, you talk about trying to live up to these impossible standards. And if you've got any insecurity, low self-esteem of any kind, it's just like gasoline from fire.
And one of the most famous hymns in the church world, right? Which again, in Old English is such a worm as I, right? Like that's the language is, and
why you don't feel good.
And I remember, I remember when I was right in the midst of that, you would preach things like, you're not worthless, but you're unworthy. And right, that was the message.
Wow,
we are outside of God, outside of Christ. We're unworthy. So of course, when that's a driving message to children, to young men in that world, and again, I know lots of wonderful people that have come out of that world that maybe even are still in that world, and we're not here to kind of just destroy or criticize any spiritual walk, other than we would encourage anybody, whether they're Christian, Buddhist, non-religious, whatever, is be open and explore what is out there. And I think that's the message. But for us, that was the upbringing, is the only way you have worth is do God's will.
Here's an ugly, uncomfortable statement. What are we taught as parents? Train them up in the way that they should go. So hand off all of the stuff we're indoctrinating you with into your kids so that they don't ask questions.
But this is just another of one of many examples of when we think about, again, Keegan and Leahy in their work, and they talk about the 3 stages of adult brain development: the socialized brain, self-authoring, self-transforming. 70% of people, the socialized brain is that stage where basically at the age of about 24, 25, you now have a fully formed brain. And it grew or developed into that all on its own without any help from you. But adult brain development requires conscious effort. It doesn't
participation.
Happen. And 70% of the population never evolve beyond it. And it's, again, all they're doing is living a life, a supposed life. Whatever messages are out there, they're using that to find self-definition. Why? Because that's the only way you can fit in. And I love what Brene Brown says. She says, we're actually looking to belong. That's what we're looking for. We're wired for belonging as human beings, right? Mm-hmm. Fitting in is not belonging. Fitting in is I have to be someone else in order to fit, right? Belonging is I am who I am and you accept me as I am, and that's how we connect, right? Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of men don't even know who they are.
No, well, and not encouraged to look.
Right.
Well, like, and some of them completely adverse to accepting who they really are because they view themselves as not good people. Like, they're a threat to society. They're a threat to their family. Living with that, like I went through my first relationship.
Right. I'm just curious. Like if you think of, like, again, traditional male sort of thing, right? Like the provider. so many men that I know and work with from a coaching perspective, like leaders, often feel like they're successful in the workplace, but not so successful with their kids, not so successful in their primary love relationship. Most of them don't have they may have a lot of bros, right, in their network, but they don't have true friends. And so because they're feeling like, in many ways, feeling like they're failing on those fronts, they just double down on their career, and they double down and work even harder at the office and longer hours, and then it creates even more problems. Is that part of the issue?
Well, you see, I think that's the biggest struggle. It's the feeling, like the discomfort that surfaces with the actual feeling of inadequacy, of not really understanding my partner to the level I should. It's easier for me to stay at work, easier for me to hang out at the tavern with my buddies, like who have like zero expectation on me. And it's not that the expectation is bad. It's my feeling of inadequacy to not be able to meet that expectation. So, it was one of the terms that like we were looking at in regards to expectancy versus expecting.
Right.
And, I tried to teach my kids that, like when we have an expectation, we've attached a result to it. And if we don't experience that result, we live with a degree of guilt, with a degree of shame. We live just like incomplete.
Yeah.
Whereas expectancy, we get to celebrate whatever shows up if we choose to. We can discard, we can sift, we can sort.
Right.
And so all of that, like coming into play, it's for me, and it always comes back to the feels.
Yeah.
Like if you aren't giving yourself permission to feel, because if we look at like this toxic masculinity and all of that, everything that they set their faces like flint against, is because there's this incredible discomfort on the emotional level. They're prepped and they feel they're prepped and they do everything they can for the onslaught that's coming towards them from the world. And I'm good, bro. I can take it. Yet inside, here's this little 7-year-old just completely depleted of all worth, all value, struggling to, who can help me on this front?
What does that provoke for you as Don shares that?
Well, it makes me think about kind of one of my soapboxes is process versus outcome. You're talking about the expectation being attached to, we have to have this outcome. We don't really control outcomes. Like we sell a lot of lies around if you do the right things, then you get to have these things. We don't control that shit.
Right.
What we can control is our process. And so our process tends to be better if we're more in tune with who we actually are, if we're more able to experience our feelings and the discomfort that we have from our feelings and use that as data. Like we can use that as science, to help us do things differently. So that even if your process is good, if you're connected, if you're doing things that recognize the humanity of others, you might still have a crappy outcome, but you're going to feel way better than if you compromised your process, if you did the things that I'm supposed to do. And then, you get the thing that you didn't even think about whether or not you wanted. Yeah. I mean, I make a lot of money off of people who, have done all the things and they get to their mid-30s and they're like,
it's not working.
So like, is this it? Like I did the thing. I went to school. I got married. I had kids. I bought the house, in the neighborhood that's supposed to, and there's a park and everything. And like, I just want to peel my skin off every day. Like, why do I feel that way? Yeah. And it's always like, well, did you think about what you wanted? Yeah. And they're like, what? Yeah. I could have done that.
there was another path.
Yeah. And the automatic question. Yeah. The automatic question is, why do I feel that way? Yeah. And that's where we search for the answer.
Why do I feel this way, but I'm not allowed to feel, right? Or feeling is not okay.
Feeling's bad.
Listen, we've been a number of these shows now. We've kind of talked about these male archetypes that have shaped the male psyche literally for like a long time, right? We talked about the lone wolf. We've talked about the stoic. We've talked about the live action hero or the warrior on some other shows. But what's frightening as we were diving into these conversations One, with some of the blowback, what I'm hearing today is from all of you is I wish I knew it was okay to be vulnerable, to feel what I'm feeling and process that much earlier. The message is not that vulnerability is okay. What I'm hearing is vulnerability is vital.
Yeah.
It's crucial, right? To being healthy and resilient.
You got him fired up.
Well, no, but it's like that's what makes you tough.
Right.
Like,
right.
if you are vulnerable, you can be tough as fuck. Like,
wow.
Because you have all the feeling. Like, you're like, oh, yeah, I can ask for help, or I know how this goes. I've done this before, as opposed to, okay, I'm just going to get through it.
Most quotable moment of the show, vulnerability makes you tough as fuck. Now, we heard, and I remember you even commented on this when we were talking about it online, one of the first responses from a listener to the show when we started that first conversation was that you guys are contributing to everything that makes men weak. Vulnerability is for women, right, was the statement, right? Like you're basically you're doing it wrong. And we're trying to say, no, like the statistics are frightening. And I may get these wrong. It's been a while since I looked at them, so I may get them backwards. But as men reach their mid-50s, right, most of us have not done a good job for all kinds of reasons, many of the reasons that we've already been discussing, at building out a healthy community. Usually our primary relationship is our significant other. That's it. And with divorce rates being what they are, there's an awful lot of men in their mid-50s, 60s that are ending up alone. And the suicide rates, you want to talk about a pandemic, like it's crazy. And this is where I may get it wrong. It may be the other way around, but I think it's 4 out of 5 suicides in the US are men in that age bracket, and 3 out of 4 in Canada. It might be the other way around, but either way,
does it matter?
It's a frightening
75 or 80%.
Right. Like at that,
not good.
It's a pandemic. It's a real problem. And I think a big reason is that men don't open up. Men feel a need to figure it all out. And you reach a stage in life now, you're potentially alone or have a very small social network, and your ability to out hustle and out muscle it, you don't have it anymore. You don't have the energy to do it. And it's a very sad place to end up in.
Well, and you've got a track record of that not working.
Right. And yet you double down on it.
Yeah. So let me
but if you only have one tool, like
to a hammer, right? Everything's an hammer.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I love that. Like regardless of where you stop in the circle, the road to recovery is feeling.
Right.
Is like getting to that place.
Yeah.
You know, when I look at what I brought into my relationships, holy fuck. Did anybody have a chance to experience any value from me? Think about that. And not just that, in the defects that we come into relationships with, we're looking for the balance in the partners we're choosing that are going to really provide us what we think we need.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's
fucked up.
Yeah, it really is. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
I talk about the fact that this supposed life that we feel we need to create, right? Those constructs, the false self that we lead with so often, that's what we're leading with. And we meet another person who's likely doing the same thing. And our relationship forms around two
supposed lives.
Boy, that's a good foundation, right? And what happens over time is more and more of your real you starts to show up. And oftentimes that's problematic because that's not actually what they fell in love with or were attracted to initially.
Well, and then it just reinforces like, oh, I'm shitty. Because when I finally appeared, right, they didn't like it. So it reinforces these things, which is why probably it's better to lead with who you are.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Like, because it's not the bait and switch that happens later.
Yeah, 100%.
But we don't like who we are. Like,
right.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Let's talk about that. Like, we don't like who we are and why.
What's behind that?
There's the journey that's uncomfortable. There's the one that we've been so conditioned to dodge and not deal with. You know, all of the upfront stuff, like how we show up, like is right there. You can deconstruct that. That can be whatever it is. But what drives that machine internally is such a guarded secret. Like we keep that thing so safe that it's impossible for us to show up with any form of authenticity.
Kelly Flanagan, who we've had on the show a number of times.
Great guy.
Incredible. And when I read his book, he has, I don't know if it's his most recent book that's out right now, but The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell. Phenomenal book. And just that language is the language in the title is the journey that this Elijah Campbell comes to. And it's the unhiding, the unboxing of that secret, that exactly what you're talking about. And that, so as soon as you started talking about it, that's what I thought about. It's time to unhide. Is the language that Kelly Flanagan would use around that concept.
I love that.
So it's brilliant. Yeah.
Gentlemen, we could talk, and we're just going to have you guys back again because one, I think the conversation is so rich, and we could go on and on and on. But I'm conscious of our audience and our limits. Our limits. Lightning round, advice to younger men. They've heard a lot of great things here today, but if you were to kind of some bullet points that you'd want to get lodged into the male psyche that is developing within them, what would that advice be? What would the wisdom be?
Take little risks so that instead of broing down, you show up. Oh. You can take these little risks with people and figure out who's maybe safe and who might reinforce, oh, I see you. If you take the little risks, you can take bigger risks. You get much more life experience. And so as kids, like we need to be talking to kids and boys.
Yeah.
And, men can catch up eventually. But if we're waiting until the 30s, right, it's really late.
It's a lot of work to undo.
So bends the tree.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I love that term when you used it. It's, for me, it's learn that there's no shame in tapping out. There's a better way forward. If you're willing to simply feel your way forward as opposed to try and construct and manipulate and move your way through with just an unauthentic self. And like maybe that's a big word for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's because we know. We really do know. We're conditioned not to accept it. We're conditioned not to deal with it, but we know when we're off the rail.
Yeah.
And we've been living off the rail for such a long time that it's difficult for us to think that there's a better way forward for us. It's too late.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's never too late.
So good. I think for me, it's a saying I've been using for 30 seconds now.
As you've always said.
As I've always said. Embrace vulnerability and you'll find strength.
Yeah, love that. Love that. I think there's folks listening to the show. I'm hoping this gets to, in front of some younger eyes and younger people. I think they're feeling that deep down there's this weight, this heaviness that something's not right. And I'd say that heaviness only gets worse over time.
Because we feel fear, we feel anxiety, we worry about things. But as boys and men, we're taught, stiff upper lip, be tough. Don't listen to that. Just keep going. And there's a lot of wisdom actually in the fear and the anxiety and being able to wrestle with it, being able to sit with it.
Yeah.
It equips you so much better.
Yeah.
So that you're not having big problems later.
Right. 100%. So the time to do the work is now.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, this has been an amazing conversation. I think we could probably talk all day long about this. So definitely we'll be having you back. I know you're going to be involved at our 100th episode celebration. So we look forward to having you there. We're going to put all the stuff in the show notes where people can find you guys online because we just think what you're offering to the world is so valuable. Thanks again for tuning in. And I hope you have found this conversation helpful. There is a better way. You heard it here today. Whatever you're going through, there is a better way. If you'll open up, reach out for help, you can discover the true you and live your richest life. As always, we remind you to like, share, subscribe. Let's get the message of living richly out there to as many people as possible. Make sure to visit our website, livingrichlly.me, where you can find all the information about our 15-day Life Vision Challenge, which is all about figuring out who you are, what you stand for, and also where you can find information about our Facebook group, the Living Richly Nation. It's such a positive, loving community that is supportive of folks that are trying to do just exactly what we're talking about here. Folks, once again, we couldn't do this without you. Thank you for your ongoing support of the show. And until next time, get out there and live your best life.